with one of those reports, which you should pick up, by the way. I'm on page 8 right now of a 36-page report that I just got from Half Past Human. And I've already got 8 different podcasts to talk to you guys about. So I'm going to do my best to condense it here to about an hour. Clif's got a ton of stuff to do. He's probably the smartest guy I've ever talked to. And we're going to break down a bunch of stuff today, folks. So thank you for waiting. And Clif, thanks a lot for coming back on the show, man. How the heck are you?
Doing fine. Doing fine.
Right on. Right on.
And I'm a little warmer than most of the country. So doing really good.
Even here in Texas, yeah, I was walking around with a spacesuit on earlier. People are like, wow, where are you from? But anyway, it's Texas. So you get kind of weak out here when it comes to the cold weather. Now, I really want to talk about, first of all, I've got some notes that I took. There's some major changes that the web bots are picking up that I was reading. And, politically in a whole bunch of different landscapes. Let's get into that. I mean, what is going on right now and what are these web bots picking up?
We're seeing a very large change in the emotional tones through the data that we gather. So it's like all of model space had a particular level of, if you just wanted to like sum the whole model space, you would get this like E equals, which is E was the equilibrium point, equals maybe 0.1, and it would always hover at that, right? There'd be stuff below it and stuff above it, but it would always hover about that. And basically what the data is showing is that emotional expression level, manifestation level, etc., is going to rise precipitously, rise very rapidly. And it's going to be quite shocking to a lot of people, because we'll go and gain emotional qualifiers about political stuff. It's basically, if we wanted to put it encapsulated into one concept, it would be that we're going to overturn or break open people's paradigms. So it's going to happen at so many different levels that for instance, let's look at a real world example. Throughout the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and even into this decade, sports have been relatively free of the angst, the spew, the accumulated emotional trash that's affecting the rest of the social order. So especially for males, it was their refuge. They could turn to sports because no matter what, it wasn't political, it wasn't social cultural crap, any of this. So now, and that was their last refuge. Okay, that was the Joe Six-Pack could go and he'd have his football games, his hockey games, etc., and he could take peace of mind that the world was a nice orderly thing that he could box in. And now we know even the sports are coming unraveled. And so we're going to lose that last refuge for the Joe Six-Pack kind of people. And then no matter where you want to look at it, politics, local, national, international, it doesn't matter. Law enforcement, local, national, international, it doesn't matter. Corruption, any of these things, they're all going to be busting wide open this year, to the extent that we're going to compress, in my opinion, 2 complete 15-year cycles of change and manifest those 2 complete 15-year cycles of change within a single 2.5-year period of time. There's this concept in the work I do that every 15 years, everything pretty much has totally changed. So it's almost a generation. It's a 3/4 of a generation. We figure generations at 20 years or to 21 years. So at about 15 years of time, you should be able to look back and say, well, everything has changed. And so, today we have cryptos and it's a mix with cryptos and dollars and so on. 15 years from now, there won't be dollars and it'll all be working on cryptocurrencies, right? Just like when they introduced the digital payment systems, et cetera, it was a mix of digital and actual cash and lots of actual cash and so on. But now actual cash has faded down to virtually nothing. And it took about 15 years for this transition to occur. And so it has to do with how ideas move through social orders and how big your social order is relative to the type of person in a general sense exist within that society. So it's going to takes China longer to go through these social transitions than us. And it takes England, slightly less time. Okay, they're steered, so they're not really a good example. But it would take Italy less time simply because the population is smaller. And they're more excitable by nature. They're more hot-blooded, so they'll burn through a lot of these ideas in a way that, in a very rapid way. And basically what's happened, in my opinion, is that the powers that be have held two complete cycles here in the USA, and we didn't have that 15-year change period. And so we've drifted, so to speak, from late 90s all the way up through until today without having this congealing of all of these things such that we have a new firm reality from which we go forward for the next 15 years. There's been no gelling of the consensus paradigm. In fact, the consensus paradigm in the USA no longer exists. That consensus paradigm has been shredded ever since the 50s and the 60s, when we had to acknowledge that, oh, a lot of people are different, and and then we get into this thing, and over time, over these 40, 50, 60 years, we get to the point where we end up with the social cultural wars that were mainly being directed by one political party trying to engage itself at a cultural level the way Mao did and take over the political process entirely, and that failed. And their timing was bad. But because of the things that were going on, we didn't have those two 15-year cycles, and the intervening 1 to 1.5 years period of time in which we congealed our paradigm. And now those paradigms have broken open. 2018, we're going to go through and have to deal with all of it in a very rapid period of hardly a year, such that we can start congealing our paradigm in 2019 and 2020. And it's just interesting. I don't know why or how it was accomplished, but in my opinion, we did not have the two complete cycles. We basically just drifted for those two cycles without having the conclusions brought in.
Well, it's fascinating how quick this cryptocurrency craze has really picked up, and the media is pushing it. And I don't know if you ever get into the predictive programming and movies and all sorts of media. That's one thing that I've always been pretty good at picking up on, because I was taught at a younger age how to really look for it in one of the classes that I took in high school. And it's just always fascinated me. But anyway, so Mr. Robot has that portrayal. If you've seen that series, there's a lot of predictive programming in it.
China, don't watch TV, so yeah.
Okay. Well, China's the one that gets, and it's a big series. It's on USA Today. It's got a pretty big impact, and it's showing the Chinese are the ones, this what's called the Dark Army. And they help get Trump into presidency, and then they help start this chain of events that creates this one of the biggest corporations in the USA to fall. And a bunch of there's these multiple terrorist attacks, a whole bunch of buildings collapse that are associated with what's called E Corp. And then there's bank holidays and martial law on the streets. Then what happens is they're investing in what's called eCoin, and they're pushing up this electronic currency, and they're kind of manipulating that as well. But it's showing the whole time the dark factions of China being kind of the dungeon masters, I guess you could say, of the cryptocurrencies and kind of this chain of events. So, I mean, are you picking up, does China have a big involvement in these cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins and stuff?
If you're talking about China in the sense of officialdom, no. Okay. You have to understand something. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with China, Bangladesh, or the USA. All governments are reactive, not proactive. They don't ever think. They simply react to what's going on around them. Politicians are never particularly bright individuals, and they are very reactive emotionally. And so they're never leaders. That's a misappropriation of the word, okay? The people that are in charge of us are always followers in ideas. So no, the media is not pushing cryptocurrencies in the USA at the moment. They are simply trying to keep up with what the population is doing, and the population is well into crypto, so they're trying to look as hip and cool as the people they're trying to sell their stuff to. Okay, so you have to understand that these cycles don't work as TV would have you understand it. China, I could believe that a small group in China, not associated with the powers of China, maybe sanctioned, maybe not, it wouldn't matter. I could believe that a small group could accomplish a change within the United States. But the Chinese government, being a puller of the strings such that we dance a marionette dance, no, it doesn't work that way, because the nature of governments won't allow them to take risks at that level, except under extreme conditions. Now, what has been the hallmark of the American empire is that a bunch of extreme people with extreme views, always seeing themselves in extreme conditions, have been trying to take over and change the whole planet because of who they were. They were expressing it out. The Chinese don't work that way. If you note, China is a very interesting place. It is surrounded by hostile enemies on all of its land borders. And it has only a little tiny sea border. So it's worried about being invaded all the damn time. It's worried about smuggling. It's worried about cross-border filtration of ideas that cause problems within its own population. China is not homogenous. There's 160 different sub-races of Chinese. Okay, so there's Aryan populations, there's Muslim populations throughout China. China's got a big Muslim terrorism issue. They've got religious warfare between the monotheists, the atheists, and the pantheists within their own culture. Their usual rate was 70,000 riots a year. Now they're running at about 150,000 riots a year that they have to deal with. 150,000 riots a year. And that's their normal cooking over operational kind of stuff. So they're engineers, okay? These are engineering people. Their goal is to fix things. And so, no, they're not going to be out there dealing with the creation of cryptos and this kind of thing, except as a follower. And that's why they're playing catch up. That's why they banned the ICOs, because it had gotten out of hand. They couldn't control them any other way than to shut them off. And that's not the action of someone that is directing it or has any kind of real grasp on what's going on. And so they're going to always be as reactive, and even more so than our social order. Because although they are communists, they are extremely conservative, because the people at the top want to do one thing: protect their power. That's all they want to do, is protect their power through their life span. And they're not, Genghis Khan kind anymore that says, let's go out and try and conquer most of the planet. So I don't see China the threat that it's, or in those terms. And the predictive programming and stuff is mind control. And so you have to be aware when you're looking at these things. Yeah, you're seeing those images, but you are reacting to them, and you're getting thoughts in your head you would not have had otherwise. And so the real question to ask is, who wants to plant what thoughts in your head out of that show?
And that's another thing too, when you look at the possibilities of who actually created Bitcoin. It's, you look it up, it's Satoshi Nakamoto. That's an alias. And there's quite a bit of speculation. There's been people that have sent me information that said they know who made Bitcoin. There's been stories that have come out. Could it be Elon Musk? Could it be an artificial intelligence? Could it be highly concentrated swamp gas from Uranus? Yeah. I don't know. But who do you think Satoshi Nakamoto is?
Well, Satoshi is less of an issue, okay? Satoshi did not invent cryptocurrencies. What he did was to come up with what is known as the solution to the double spend problem. Because cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, electronic digital assets have existed conceptually since the late 60s. And they were discussed and written about throughout the late 70s into the 80s and even into the early 90s. But there was always this problem that could not be overcome, which was the ability to double spend electronic currencies if you did it rapidly enough, right? So, and Satoshi had a brilliant idea, which was the blockchain, the consensus algorithm, which causes or stops the ability of the digital asset to be used in two places at once, which is really one of the nature of the digital media. Create once, copy infinitely. Only you don't want that with a currency. And in fact, you need to go the other way. You want to have very strict controls on creation. So what Satoshi did was to solve the double spend problem. But he is in a long line of people that have contributed to the idea of cryptocurrencies and even into blockchain. The blockchain was known at the maybe late 70s. Okay, maybe the concept was officially discussed in the remnants of the Bell Labs structure in the 70s and in late 70s, and there were some papers written about what we would call blockchain. But again, that doesn't eliminate the double spend problem. What does eliminate that is the consensus algorithm, what's called gossip, and the gossip protocol was really Satoshi's insight. And then he wrote up a really cool white paper that said, basically, screw the banks, we've got to do something, because it came out in 2008. And he said, we can't go through this shit again. We can't allow ourselves to be victims again. Here's a solution, should the planet choose to use it. And apparently we do choose to use it.
Now, that's another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. You brought up blockchain. I'm so glad you did. It's kind of tough to understand exactly what that is. So maybe you could give us, I'm sure you could explain it in a very fluid manner, and I won't think it's difficult to understand anymore.
Sure. It's not a big deal. Okay. A blockchain is a distributed ledger. So all these kids, yourself included, you've never had to deal with paper ledgers where you might go to somebody and deliver a bit of work, and they would write down that you'd completed your task and how much you were going to be paid, right? So let's think of it instead in a different, let's not use the word ledger. Let's think of it as a spreadsheet, all right? So this is like a spreadsheet that might be at the core of your financial budget for your household or something, right? And here's the deal. You've got a copy of this spreadsheet, and in order to make it secure, what we do is you also give a copy of the spreadsheet to your wife, all right? And so you both have a copy of the spreadsheet. And then you write a little tiny chunk of software that makes sure that any change made to one copy of the spreadsheet is instantly, as soon as it can possibly be done, reflected in the other copy of the spreadsheet, so that they're 100% linked. So if your wife says, I'm going to spend, $99 on chrysanthemums, and it'll instantly show up in your ledger, and then you'll be able to say, oh, damn, she spent that $99, and so now I can't buy orange soda. Okay. But it's sort of like, so it's like a sort of a checkbook in that regard, right? Again, something a lot of kids wouldn't understand. But this concept of the linked spreadsheet really is what the blockchain is. And so you have all of these computers that all have a copy of that same page in that spreadsheet, and the software's goal is to make sure that all of those pages agree, and to work out any differences and irregularities that may crop up, and that prevents the fraud. So if you wanted to spend the $99 on the orange soda, you could type into your spreadsheet real quick, I already spent that $99, but then the computer's going to say, no, we've got a timestamp. We know you're bullshitting us. She really spent the $99, and she gets the chrysanthemums, and you don't get the orange soda. And that's what it does. So there's the ledger part of it that sits on all these millions of PCs. And then you have a chunk of software that's written that coordinates across the internet, checking timestamps. So they're all asking each other, okay, what time did she actually write down that she was spending the money on the chrysanthemums? And you get, and then there's 55 computers that say she wrote it down at 1:09 p.m. And then they've got your PC that says you wrote down that you spent it on cider at 1:08 p.m. And so the 50 are going to say, take a hike, dude. We outweigh you. And thus it's reconciled, thus the chrysanthemums get the money and the orange soda does not. Sort of makes sense?
Oh, it totally does. Now that makes me ask a question for somebody that might want to take advantage of that system. You use a computer like the one in China as an example, where there is calculating 93,000 quadrillion floating points per second. Could they use that one computer against 1,000 regular PCs?
Because we don't care about what the individual PCs are doing. It all works off of atomic time. And this is why I'm really good at understanding what's going on with the blockchain, because before anybody does anything to their ledger, they go out and they get an agreed upon algorithm for what time it is. So even if that computer is a millisecond ahead of yours, it won't make any difference because of the way in which the consensus algorithm has to happen. It's not just your PC that has to record it. You've got to put it out with this gossip protocol and get all these other PCs, all these other computers to accept it. And so, yeah, you can get yours out really fast, but if none of the others accept it, then it doesn't do you any good. You can't bust the system, so to speak. You can't game it that way. And then what they did for Bitcoin was they stripped it down to its essentials, eliminated what we call attack surfaces in the computer security world. Every single chunk of code is a potential attack or exploit surface that allows some level of hacking potentially. So if you prune and you clean it, you make your code extremely tight, you reduce the number of attack surfaces possible. And then they eliminated some other stuff within the the Bitcoin scripting language to make it even more resistant. And then they have the gossip protocol that says under these circumstances, it takes this many computers to have the same exact copy for us to validate that this is the actual spending record of RexPair.
Oh man, that's fascinating. And there's so much speculation about which, just like anything else, which coin is going to reign supreme. Is it going to be the Bitcoin? Is Ethereum going to take over Bitcoin? Litecoin? Ripple is doing really good right now, I've noticed. And now there's these other coins out there. There's 1,400 cryptocurrencies, at least right now. It'll probably
no. There's 2,500 or more tokens, and of that, there's maybe a dozen or so coins. I differentiate between ERC20 tokens and actual cryptocurrencies like Litecoin.
But yeah, talk to us about that. That's great.
Okay, so all right, so some of these things, like let's take an example, like Pillar or DIM or even EOS. Okay, these are ERC20 tokens. ERC means Ethereum request for comments. This is how techie guys do things. If I'm going to do something and I'm in a tech organization or group, I'll write up this little thing in a white paper and I'll say request for comments. And so if I wrote it up, it would be a Clif request for comments. Here it was Ethereum because it was written up for the Ethereum network. And so they said, we've got this idea for these tokens that could be traded like coins, but they would behave slightly different in the software level. And so we're not going to really call them coins, we'll call them tokens. And they just ended up getting labeled ERC20 tokens. And that's how we come up with some of the weird language in the cryptocurrency world. But we can think of them as digital assets. That's a real good way to think of them, as a digital asset, not necessarily. Some of the digital assets are currencies. Some of the digital assets are currencies and then some. So for instance, Ethereum is a digital currency, but it is also the ability to carry a smart contract. So it's a smart digital currency. And so it gets real deep and stuff, but let's simplify our thinking a bit here. If we think of these guys as digital assets, the original question you're asking about which is going to dominate and so on shouldn't even be asked. Okay, because we could put ourselves back into the 1850s in Louisiana and all through the thriving South. 1850s was a boom period for shipping of cotton and all different kinds of products to and from the US. And it was financed by private banks, which were known as the Louisiana private banks. And this is how they got the name Dixie, by the way. These banks produced their own banknotes, and the French language was used by the Louisiana population. And so they called them DIS, as in DIX. The rest of it meaning 10. So you'd get a 10 note from a particular Louisiana bank. And they called them Dixies up north and in other parts of the country where we didn't speak enough French to pronounce it right. And so that's how the South became known as in the land of Dixie, right? In that period of time, there were dozens of banks. The banks extended all the way up into the Ohio River Valley, each one issuing their own currency. No one was predominant. And so you didn't ask which bank's currency was going to dominate the region or anything. They all had different scopes, different purposes, and so on. We're much more into that kind of a world at the moment. So your thinking reflects more the Cold War kind of mental programming that you've been under as a kid here in the US, where they want you to think in terms of this, that, and or that kind of thing, right? And so you must have a dominant currency. And no, we don't. And I don't expect that there will be a dominant one. And they'll all have different values and take the center stage at different times. And it's going to be quite exciting because we're truly in a multipolar world. And so we have to have, there's going to be expressions of this everywhere, including in the cryptocurrencies.
Did you get that, Lee? Does that answer your question for you? Hey, somebody asked that question in the chat. So yeah, I think that's just a beautiful way to put it. It's more like a stock in a company almost, even though it's not a company. If you look at the charts, that's another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. You look at the charts on a lot of these cryptocurrencies, and then the different Ethereum, Litecoin, Bitcoin, etc. And then you look at some of the stocks, and if if you ever get into the stock market, you just kind of watch the graphs sometimes also that help with your decisions. So are they do you kind of see a lot of this? Do you see similarities there?
No, I see a replacement. Okay, so stocks, the idea of stocks is dying. Stocks can be thought of as very stupid money, a stupid asset. Not only don't you ever really have anything that can do something for you, these days you have to give your money to several different people in order for them to send you back a digital acknowledgement that, yeah, we bought that stock for you, or at least we're pretending to buy that stock for you. And so, and it's something that doesn't do anything for you. Now, nowadays I could buy Ethereum, which is actually it's a token, and it allows me to run stuff on the Ethereum network because the network charges a maintenance fee called gas, and so many, or one Ethereum equals so many millions of gases, all right? But Ethereum, it can allow me to run smart contracts. It can allow me to develop a business with my smart contracts. It can allow me to generate an income. Stocks don't really do things for you. Stocks are a very static form of a digital asset that reached its heyday, and it died probably a couple of years back. We just haven't seen it fall over yet. But your point is taken to a certain extent about the charts and the relationship between them. We have these ERC-20 tokens being issued by private companies that can be thought of in a loose kind of a way as a form of participation in that company, although it is not a security. It's not a claim on any of their assets. Ultimately, what this is the way it works out. Ultimately, if a company were to crap out on you, theoretically, and you held a share of stock in that company, and they had to liquidate that company and sell off all of its machine tools and sell off all of the safety equipment and the buildings and everything, theoretically, you would have a claim there on some portion of the assets of that company that failed, right? That's really what a share is. It's a share in that potential, and that's how it was backed. That's why the United States government calls them securities, because a share is secured by the assets of the companies. Now, digital assets don't work that way. Digital assets provide to you things of value right away, in that you can do things on existing operational networks with these digital assets, or you can hold on to them and let others speculate value into them and then trade them to others for something else later on. And so they're very much more open. They're also don't have the brokers, the financiers, the bankers, all these people in the middle that are taking big chunks of the value out of the proceeds. And so not only can you use your ERC-20 tokens to run on various networks and do things, potentially build a business or an income, you also have the ability with these assets to not participate in the non-profitable inflationary part of the old system. Because every time they sold stocks, you'd have people that were taking a rake off, and we're not adding any value. They're just taking part of the proceeds, stamping up a higher value and saying you got to pay to get this share of stock. That kind of a deal. Here, you don't have to sell through those people. You can sell peer-to-peer. And so you can decide and you can participate in real price discovery for digital assets in a way that doesn't exist in the old stock system. But it's still participation. And here's how the participation can work. Let's take a company, Populous. Okay, if you bought Populous tokens, and Populous is going to bring out software, is bringing out software now that allows for digital factoring, which is the ability to loan money to businesses that need it for less than 30 days or 90 days, short-term loans. And so if you had Populous tokens, you could participate and loan money through their network to small businesses that needed it, and you could make the interest off that. Or you could participate in Populous just by holding onto the tokens, let the platform build and become more successful, which puts more value into it, which concurrently raises the value of the Populous token to those people that want to use it to loan money out to these other businesses and gain the interest. And so at that level, it's a participation that is directly tied to the success of the Populous company. Meaning, unlike stocks and so forth, so much of that, the market is simply controlled. And it's the verbiage of, who the great stock picker is and what he's saying at the moment and so on. as opposed to the actual performance of the underlying companies themselves. And here you don't have the fake structure of all of these forms that all these companies have to report under. It removes a huge paperwork burden for them to not issue shares and instead go into issuing of tokens because they don't have to have any of the reporting requirements that are basically bogus anyway, that they're trying to make up numbers to satisfy the market, not actually reflect what the company is doing. So it's a better system all the way around.
You know, a lot of the concerns that people have, especially when it comes to these electronic payments, and see, everything's pretty much electronic now, though. You go to the bank, they're sending electronic data to another location. So, but what is a way to secure? Because here's another thing. I feel that there's probably going to be a rise in, for a while anyway, just like anything else, that the media is going to push this being dangerous, because just recently an article came out in Ukraine, which is dangerous in and of itself. Ever go to Ukraine? It's pretty dangerous, folks. Somebody got kidnapped out there because of some cryptocurrency.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well known.
Like, oh, if you got cryptocurrency, you better watch out. The boogeyman will get you. He's going to jump out of the couch. He's going to get you. Sorry, I'm being sarcastic, but you get my point.
Right.
Are they going to push that?
Yeah, that's going to be the meme, because the banks, see, we're in direct competition now between those people that are involved in digital assets and the banks. The banks don't like the fiat currencies that they're operating under. The central banks have really hamstrung them. They've killed their whole ability to make money with the continuing dropping interest rates and the weird systems that we're into now. And so but the banks, to a certain extent, even though they're buying cryptocurrencies and so forth, want to keep their customers in the fiat world, and in fact are being told to do this. So they will promulgate what we call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They're going to even pay for some of the FUD to be created about a lot of these currencies. And the guy in the Ukraine, but there's when I was a computer consultant working for big name computer companies, I'd go to Mexico. They would have to have armed guards. I'd have to have a guy with a submachine gun with me at all times, and they had to take out anti-kidnap insurance on me. So it's not restricted to cryptocurrencies. You get people being kidnapped all the time because of the desperation and the poor structure of the systems we operate under.
Absolutely. And just a couple more questions about these currencies, and then I'd like to get into some other parts of the report, because there's just so much information, and thank you for answering it as fluently as you did. It makes much more sense to me now. And I'm reading through somebody actually just hit the super chat button and said, Clif high for NASA director. And then somebody else said Clif high for president.
Hey, I don't lie that well.
Good
you can tell I get sweat on top of my forehead.
Yeah, you actually have a conscience. It'd be difficult. Okay. So so basically I think there's a few different forms of code. There's not 1,500 different forms of code for these different cryptocurrencies. You said
correct.
So there's
the 2,500 tokens. Most of those tokens are running on Ethereum, so they're within a very narrow niche of code. Correct.
Okay, so Ripple, Litecoin, are those a part of Ethereum as well?
No. Ripple is a bankster coin. Okay, it's a non-mined coin. They can issue as much as they want. There's no restrictions on it. It's owned and operated by the banks. The banks are trying to use it to get the benefits of the blockchain. One of the things you have to understand here is if you use the blockchain as a giant distributed database, if you think of it that way, instead of a spreadsheet, it's a giant distributed database that all these computers are working to keep clean and correct at all times. Then you can think of the blockchain as a very astute business pathway, because it allows you to eliminate redundancy in employees. It means that you've always got secure backups on everything you're doing all over the place. You can recover anywhere to any degree of time, and you can monitor everything very effectively with far fewer people involved. And so the banks and it's faster. And so the banks want to use the blockchain, and they developed Ripple, and it's intended to be a settlement vehicle and do all these other things for banks. And it's sort of thought of internally in the banking industry. I'm characterizing. I'm outside that industry, but I read a lot of their literature, and it's sort of characterized in there as being a replacement for SWIFT, which is the electronic interbank system. okay, that they charge you $35 to do a wire transfer. When you use a wire at a bank, you're doing a Swift transaction through the Swift software. And the blockchain is kind of conceived as a way of getting around the limitations that Swift imposes. So I'm not particularly a fan of Ripple. I don't like their code. Litecoin is its own form of a blockchain. It's a clone of the original Bitcoin code that's been altered and is fast, and they've done a bunch of other things to it. And it's its own form of a cryptocurrency. It's not an ERC20 token. Things that are like DIM or Populous or Veritasium or any one of these 2,500 others are tokens that are associated with Ethereum.
I mean, that's incredible. So really, it sounds to me like if somebody is out there that is very good at code, knows the process, has the right connections, they create their own code, they can create their own currency. They're just going to have to figure out a way to get it embedded into the market.
That's it. Okay, see right there. Yes, they can create their code. And this is one of the big objections to all of the digital assets way back when. They would say, but anybody can create their own currency. And it's true. I could create my own currency. I could create one for my wife and for each of my dogs. And in fact, I could create a couple of currencies for my chickens. But who the hell is going to use them?
Chicken currency?
What's that?
I said, have you ever considered chicken currency? I shouldn't.
Exactly. And I'd make it blue chicken currency, but anyway, I could do these things, right? But you've hit on the single thing that's the issue. A digital asset has no value whatsoever. It is true. A Bitcoin has no value absent humans, but that's true of gold, land, food, anything. If a human doesn't value it, there's no intrinsic value in gold. It's a particular mineral in our planet. The reason that we think it has this particular worth is because humans value it, not any other reason. Humans value digital assets now, so they have worth there. Now, there's the rub. I could create my own digital currency, but I would have to go through the trouble of developing the network effect to get other humans to value it. And that network effect is not easily achieved. All right, it happens spontaneously. They can try and engineer it, and that's what they try and do when they try and do a regime change, is they try and engineer a network effect around a political idea such that everybody accepts it, and they go out and they're motivated to do something about it. That's what basically a network effect is among humans. Okay, it's where you and I both share a particular conviction that motivates us to put our calories to doing something. And so I would have to engineer that network effect to get millions of humans to accept my blue chicken coin. And I'm lazy. I'm not going to do that. So it's not going to happen. Or I could be highly motivated, but everybody says, no, I don't want anything to do with blue chicken shit coins, right? I just don't want to have anything to do with them. And so it's not going to happen. And so that's why we're in this situation. That's why I expect that over time, especially this year, we might see maybe even another 10,000 tokens offered. Many of these are going to go because people won't value them.
And another thing too, it sounds to me like, because when you see Bitcoin get to almost 20,000, and then just like everything else, you're going to have your ups and your downs, It's neat to see it get up to that point, because then it makes me think, okay, that's the new high. And then it goes down, and then people buy it again and it goes up. And, that's one thing that I do kind of see similarities. You just have to know when to get in and when to get out. But I just find it fascinating that you explain blockchain in a way that totally makes sense now. It avoids double spending. This does away with half, and people are so under the, okay, everything's true on the internet, everything, even if they contradict it, it's all true.
Right.
So people are saying stuff that they just don't fully understand. And I think that puts it in perspective a lot better. So that is much appreciated. And, if we could, then I would also like to talk to you. I've seen a ton of people recently that be getting the flu. I'm getting just sicker than dogs. I mean, all the way up in the Northwest in your neck of the woods, East Coast, down in Florida, out here in Texas. And I've been taking this stuff called Coral C, and I've been taking this I feel great. And I would just definitely consider checking out getthetea.com and checking out their health supplements. They use only organic, or most of their stuff is organic, and it's very, very good stuff. That is my shameless plug. Leak Project. Tell get the T.com, Leak Project Extension. Okay. So what are your web bots picking up on with the 2018 is a huge year of change, as you're showing politically, the monetary values and things are just, everything's turning upside down, and it's getting exciting. I think this is getting really exciting. Is it picking up anything on like pandemics, flu, stuff like that?
We've got, always have illness and sickness in there. The issue for dealing with the data is being able to get meaning out of it, okay? Get something that's reliable, because this is always discussed, and there's actually industries that are devoted to making people think that now is the time to get ill, okay? And so that's why we have a flu season, right? Actually, the flu season relates to the lack of vitamin D, as the sun is less active in the wintertime. Without the vitamin D, your immune system is compromised. And so you're more likely to become ill. And they're just taking advantage of that and hyping their own solutions or therapies that are not solutions to the problem, which is get more vitamin D in the system and build your immune system back up, that sort of thing, right? But we've got some serious contributors to the health situation across the US and a lot of the planet now. And this includes the geoengineering, the chemtrails, the ozone hole, and the impacts there, as well as the changes in the sun itself. And so it is expected and shows up in the data that we're going to get very large scale disease outbreaks over these next few years. But nothing I've got in there shows a replica, for instance, of the Spanish flu of the World War I, right? I don't have anything in the data that shows, 40 or 50 million people killed by a flu. But we do have lots of data showing that over the course of time, we're going to have lots of individuals, hundreds of millions of people that will be physically degraded by the environmental stresses that we have at the moment. And so but it won't show up as a pandemic because it's going to happen so slowly over the course of a number of years. So we actually have data that says that we're going to get a lowering, especially in the USA, of the average age of death especially for males, especially for white males. And so instead of being 72, it'll lower down to maybe 68 and lower, that kind of thing, right? And then there will be corresponding shifts downward in all these other metrics. And this will occur this year and into next year, such that it'll become a health crisis. And it's the accumulated effects of what we've been going through for these past few years that's going to be causing some of these statistical changes, some of the demographics coming on up. Some of them are going to be thought to be favorable by government because they won't be paying out as much Social Security, for instance. And there's no real interest at that level of government to save us individually. And so they're going to just say, oh, hey, here's a favorable trend. We're not going to have to spend as much on Social Security. Well, it's because people are dying younger. And they're not going to look at the things they're doing that are actually causing the dying younger part of it. It's going to be a very stressful period of time between now and 2022. And there will be a larger than average number of individuals that decide to check out of the planet. But I don't have anything in the data that says uncontrollable pandemic or any of this kind of stuff sweeping through the planet. I do have lots of data suggesting that opportunistic disease is going to rise very rapidly because the rate of degradation has been creeping up on people and has now reached certain critical thresholds.
Yeah, I mean, your report, you were showing there was going to be some pretty hardcore energies until 2022, and then it was going to mellow out a little bit. I remember reading about that, and also I want to talk to you about the accelerated volcanoes. You talk about earthquakes and a lot of activity around the Ring of Fire. Let's talk about that.
We're in a period of time now where the planets, the large planets in the solar system, the big outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, even Uranus to a certain extent, these bigger planets are all, if we want to think about it this way, on one side, on our side of the sun relative to our orbit. And so these guys are putting a stress on us. They're actually pulling the gravitational effects of these planets are actually pulling on Earth in a way that is predictable, but it happens only every 425 years. And so every 425 years, we go into a little mini ice age, no matter what. And it has to do with this elongation of our orbit because of these planets being over on our side of the sun. At that same time, they are also sort of like at opposing angles to each other relative to where Earth is. So we get an increase in volcanoes and earthquakes and other Earth effects every 425 years that goes along with this period of a mini ice age as a result of these planets in our position there. And this is can be predicted to continue to occur, ramp up until about 2022, fade off for a little bit, and then ramp back up again until the 2030s. And so it's going to be a rough time for volcanoes, for volcanic islands, for anybody in a seismically active area, because if it could erupt or shake or fracture, it will do so over these next 4 years.
Are you seeing anything in Yellowstone?
No, not like that, because see, here's the thing. Yellowstone is technically a supervolcano, but it's not a supervolcano that could erupt because there's no there there. When they talk about Yellowstone erupting 600 odd years back, it was thought there were 120 volcanoes in that area, and there were 12 very large volcanoes on the order of Mount Rainier in that area. And when the magma pocket blew, it blew all of those all the volcanoes into absolute dust and scattered them around the planet. But it also meant there's nothing sitting on top of the cauldron pushing down on it to keep the pressure there, thus causing the individual spouts that eventually the pressure builds up, the spouts plug, and then the whole thing has to erupt. So if it's going to do anything, it'll be more like a mountain building like St. Helens. It'll be bloop, 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 in situ, in place, that will just build more mountains over time. So it's not going to go kablooey and obliterate half of the country or anything like that. This is the same situation that happened with Krakatoa. Krakatoa was the largest supervolcano that we had at that particular time. And when it blew up giant amounts of volcanoes and earth and stuff that were sitting on the magma pocket and pressurizing it. Now there's no pressure there, and so we get an entirely different kind of activity out of the volcanoes.
You know, in Antarctica, recently they were releasing some information, Science Daily, where they have information about 91 new volcanoes. I don't know how new they are. They say they're newly discovered, but 91 volcanoes under Antarctica. And what's going on out there? What are the web bots picking up?
All kinds of stuff. I mean, all kinds of stuff about that. Yeah. Antarctica may actually end up having what we would think of as a supervolcano explosion. Okay. It may have a version of Yellowstone or Krakatoa. I'm not aware at this point of any other part of the planet that could occur. And if you actually look at Antarctica in the pre-res maps, or the current NASA picture of Antarctica without the ice, you see that in fact, it is the remnants of another Krakatoa. It's the remnants of a supervolcano situation that existed in the past. And so it's all these concentric rings of islands and one central area that is the continent, and lots of water in there. And that's where all these magma areas had blown up in the past in that supervolcano explosion. Now, those 91 volcanoes are off on one side. They're down at the bottom of a trench, and there may be 1,100 other volcanoes around it, for all we know. There's just huge numbers of volcanoes there. So this could be good, or this could be bad, all right? It could be good because there may be so many spouts that there's no possibility of overpressurization, and a supervolcanic explosion won't occur in our lifetimes. And it could be bad simply because there's so many spouts that it indicates there's so much activity that no matter what, even those number of spouts would be overwhelmed. There's just no way for us to know with what data the government is releasing. But it's off on that one little side of Antarctica. Now, our data sets are showing that major geological, topological changes are occurring in the region and will do so over time. Now, some of the things that have been forecast there include the sealing off of some undersea trenches and radically changing the current patterns of what's known as the Southern Sea. People have to understand that Antarctica is basically isolated from the other parts of the planet in terms of continents, and so it has an ocean all the way around it. And because it has an ocean all the way around it, with no other land sticking in there to cause permutations at all, you can get huge storms that just keep going in circles. So you get these giant seas and tremendous storms. And this is why the Cape of Good Hope and the crossings in Patagonia and so on with ships have always been so dangerous. It's because of the potential for the seas to build up there, because in the roaring 50s and 60s of latitude, there's just nothing to stop the winds and the waves. Now, our data sets are saying that that's going to come to a halt sometime in these next couple of years with some undersea changes that will change currents. And it probably may have, or it may have to do with a land rising situation. And that is going to change the currents, which will alter climate around the planet eventually, but will radically change the sea conditions around Antarctica and the southern tip of South America and Africa over these next couple of years. Should be noticeable in 2018. Late in 2018, according to our data, we'll start getting reports of really weird weather coming out of Antarctica, changing in the sea conditions, calm, entirely flat areas that never used to exist, and different kinds of weather relative to the oceans around there. And it'll all be due to an unseen at that point, unknown at that point, change in the topography of the region as a result of either a collapse or a rising up, is most likely a rising up of new land that diverts currents. And so the data sets are suggesting that a new current flow will occur northward and will come between South America and Africa. And so that'll be it would be like having a Gulf Stream, a cold Gulf Stream, so to speak, starting at the tip of South America and going up towards England. And it's going to be radically altering of our climate, and will be part of the mini ice age, inducing glaciers, all different kinds of things.
Okay, so you don't see the ice in Antarctica melting to the point to where there's going to be a rise in the sea levels. You actually see it being a cooling off here for X amount of years.
Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at a couple of different things. Yes, Antarctica is going to lose ice, but that doesn't mean the sea levels will rise. Okay. There for a couple of different reasons. First off, sea level is falling now and has been for like the last 4 or 5 years. And the reason it's falling has to do with the increase in ultraviolet light and gamma rays, which are causing a lot more precipitation and has started creating, as we've all known, as it was forecasted in my reports, these rivers in the sky and lakes in the sky that would just come on over and just dump, and just incredible amount of water like we'd never, ever seen before in modern human history, right? And so that's going on now, has been for 4 or 5 years as part of the mini ice age. The sun cools down, more gamma rays come around it, and our climate changes. As a result of that happening, this increase in precipitation, we're actually dumping more rain on Antarctica than has ever been seen before. That's helping to erode some of the glaciers. But even that is not adding to sea level, because huge amounts of rain are now dumping on all over parts of the planet, including the parts that are above sea level. And it'll take a long time for some of the rain getting into some of these places to work its way back to the ocean. So the ocean levels are continually falling and are expected to do so for decades, maybe 100 years. Maybe we'll see sea levels fall for the next 100, 125 years in a general sense, right? And so Antarctica can lose all of its ice, and it won't make a damn bit of difference, because we're going to have new glaciers springing up all over the planet, and in fact are having some signs of them already. And as a result of that, more ice and more water will be locked up on land. It just won't be Antarctica. So it's kind of good for us, because we get to go and muck about in Antarctica and see what's there underneath the ice.
Let's talk about that, Cliff. What is there underneath the ice? And do these civilizations go back 10, 12? Did I freeze up?
You froze up. Yeah, I lost that.
Every time I ask a good question, it freezes up. The gremlins have been jumping out. We've been talking about some good stuff. You know you're onto something good when the gremlins jump out. I've got the fastest internet available. Everything's fine. And then highly concentrated swamp gas comes through the you know, these gremlins that you're feeding water to, and you're not supposed to feed them after night. Anyway, what was the question that I just asked? Antarctica.
About the ancient civilizations.
What the heck is there? Yeah.
I think it's what we call Atlantis. Okay. And I think I don't think that civilization is millions of years old necessarily, but I think that it has the archaeology to prove that humans are multi-million-year-old residents of Earth. And so I think that is one of the repositories that is been saved for us by universe. So now there's this incredible conspiracy. It's been in existence, and they've slapped you in the face with it all of your life. You believe this conspiracy so deeply that you will be offended when I tell it to you, and it will shock you, and because you're so mind controlled about this. And this conspiracy can be summed up in what they want you to think. Smithsonian is good. Okay. The Smithsonian Institution is not a museum. It never puts anything on display. Its whole point is to corral knowledge and destroy evidence. The Smithsonian has destroyed more evidence of what actually took place on Earth than any other group, including, they're worse than the Taliban. The Taliban wish they could be as good at the destruction of evidence as the Smithsonian. Okay, these people at the Smithsonian are masters at destroying and lying and hiding and obscuring real human history. They should be part of, in my opinion, by the way, when we finally get around to the Truth and Reconciliation and the arrests, please let's arrest everybody in the Smithsonian and start asking them, what the fuck, guys? All right, what do you guys really know? And so that aside, that little rant aside, the Antarctica is preserved. Smithsonian hasn't been able to get much of their hands on it because it's been encapsulated by ice. Okay, hopefully 2018, the year of the Great Reckoning, the year of the Let's Get Real people, that year will cause the Smithsonian to go down in power at the same time that the ices in Antarctica are melting, such that we don't have to worry about the Smithsonian destroying everything that is there to be found in Antarctica. And I think Antarctica is the greatest single repository of true human history that we have on this planet. And a lot of it's going to be coming out. The data sets have been really whipped up about it for a long period of time. And then the whole marketing effort around the Corey Good Blue Avian space chicken religion polluted the data sets for me. And so I started getting into some interesting problems with my own data mining, and have backed off on this because I lost my edge on reliability. But nonetheless, the emotional values in the data sets continue to rise. The Corey Good phenomenon is fading off. Nobody gives a shit anymore. It's not being promoted the way it was. And so hopefully in a little while, I'll be able to get back to looking at those data sets and work out new reliability algorithms and come up with some new forecasts on it. But the emotional values around Antarctica continue to grow, as do actual real world examples in terms of going and looking for companies doing business there, companies devoting resources to Antarctica, the military, all of the people visiting. You know, the very first thing that happens after Trump gets elected, the very first thing that happens in an official fashion after Trump gets elected, he sends Newt Gingrich down to Antarctica as his emissary to talk to whatever the hell is down there to be talked to. Okay, so Newt Gingrich went on down as his eyes on the scene, and it was that important that it was the very first thing that occurred after the election. And even on the election day, they had, what's his name, Kerry, going down to Antarctica. So it's that important. In fact, insofar as the Queen and all of her crime family, there is nothing more important than Antarctica.
It's fascinating whatever it is that's out there and how much control and influence. I'm certainly excited to see what is going to uncover and unfold over the next few years. And man, they are nailing my internet. This is crazy. I would like to ask you a couple more questions before we close out tonight. As far as disclosure, recently Beavis and Butthead were flying F-22s and going, look at that UFO. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they released it on the news and people are like, whoa, see, I think that was kind of a wag the dog scenario. I don't know if you remember that, what I'm talking about, but are they going to finally disclose extraterrestrials this year?
You've got to define that, okay? Because here's the thing. If you're thinking the president's going to come on out and stand next to an ET.
Did you get that?
No, that kind of stuff isn't going to happen, all right? You're totally frozen now. There we go. Okay, now we're back.
It's because they love us.
Yes. They want it to last longer. Yeah. So here's the thing. Our data sets are full of disclosure, but it's not what anybody thinks it is. It's the data sets, the way they describe it is over these next 5 years, we get all kinds of fantastic technologies brought out to us. And 5 years from now, it's even more of a yawn about space aliens. It's as though the populace is quite well aware of it. It's not a big deal, and so on. Now, we have hiccups within the data that show big spikes of emotional activity that I think are stair steps on the way to a paradigm change around this idea. So if we were looking at my original statement about the 2 15-year periods being held in abeyance, so to speak, then over these next couple of years, we're going to get a consolidation of everybody's consensus view around the idea of space aliens. And this consolidation is going to create the new paradigm that will take us through these next 15 years. And I believe that this consolidation could be forecast as suggesting that it's like, yeah, we know aliens exist. Let's get the government out of the way and see what's actually there. So a lot of this stuff, none of the stuff in our data sets that is meaningful relative to disclosure have anything to do with government. Are we still connected?
Yes. They got me for a minute. So I didn't hear the last part of what you said. Hopefully the audience did. You know, we've got a huge crowd. There's over 1,200 people in here right now, you know, that have been, the stream just keeps growing. So people are really excited to have you here. So basically you don't think that President Trump's going to be walking out doing a press conference with the Greys saying, hey, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Gray. And this is a reptilian shapeshifter over here that actually.
Right. I don't think it's going to go down that way. The data sets would suggest, however, that Trump is going to walk on out and give us a speech. It also suggests a time for when the speech might occur that I'm not going to go into because I've got certain temporal markers I'm going to keep to myself. It also suggests that the speech will be about the release of technologies without really acknowledging where we got the technologies from, but sort of letting it out there without actually declaring it, right? So in other words, it'd be as though they're talking about all these cool technologies that we got from these crashed spaceships. And let it go at that, only one reference to it, and then develop, go into the technology and the cool stuff coming out itself, as opposed to that particular aspect of it about, well, wait a second, fella, what did we do to get those ships? When did it occur and all the details and so on. It's as though the data is suggesting that the important thing at that particular point that this speech is suggested to occur will be the social or society level of uplift that is occurring, not just economic, but also emotional, and it'll be around the consolidation of a new paradigm. So in the sense of, the great generation defined themselves as great because they had to fight World War II, right? So they had to come together. They had to understand what it was that was being asked of them. They had to have a common vision as to what the enemy was and the requirements that were being put on the social order. And they had to be prepared to deal with the strains that were affecting the social order as a result of that huge amount of focus, a whole generation focusing basically on one goal. And so that's how we get this idea of a great generation. They weren't particularly fractured. They weren't fragmented and so on. The powers that be tried to arrange this and engineer it in the 50s and the 60s with the advertising trying to get us into a narrow, rigid, lockstep kind of Chinese, military way of thinking, right? And it didn't take. we can go into that for, I mean, it didn't take for a lot of different reasons, but so it does not spontaneously occur. You need that outside influence thing that causes it to arise within a generation. All right. There's got to be something that draws it out of people. You can't push it into them. So with that understanding, let me state that my data sets are describing to me yet another great generation. It's not my generation. It's not your generation, Rex. It's the generation that's behind you back a little ways, right? That generation will be yet another great generation because they will, according to my data sets, have this external focus that will draw their attention, cement the paradigm, give them a raison d'etre, a reason for life, a reason for existence that is greater than themselves, that will carry them through their entire generation, the same way the World War II effort carried that generation through the Depression and in through that particular war, right? And so I'm supposing, so this is my opinion. Now, the data sets, first off, the data sets say that this generation is there, it's forming, and something's going to draw this out of them. The description for that doesn't include things like World War III. It won't be World War III that's going to draw this out of this generation. So I'm supposing it has to do with space aliens, because that would be the only thing, in my opinion, at this stage, that would be big enough to affect a whole generation that way. One other possibility might be the ice age itself, but that's so slow, I can't see it impacting us the way that the space alien thing could impact us, to the point where it draws that whole generation together, gets a consensus formed within it that affects the whole rest of the social order.
Are we going to destroy the ozone to where crops are going to have to be grown indoors for the most part within maybe the next 10, 20 years?
Has nothing to do with us, but the answer is yes. Humans don't destroy ozone. We create ozone like mad, okay? The idea of ozone destroying chemicals was valid when we had all the hairsprays and stuff that used the chlorofluoral carbons. But that period was brief, and the ozone was already being destroyed at that same period of time by natural forces. It probably is an aspect of the ice age and what's going on. We know that 15%, okay, so 5% of our atmosphere was taken off in the 2003 period of time that we saw the Banda Aceh earthquake, all right, and the destruction of that island. The earthquake didn't cause the atmosphere to be lost. What caused the atmosphere to be lost was a combination of a bombardment of gamma rays and also a solar expulsion that blew off the top 15% by depth of our atmosphere, but about 5% by volume. And it seriously, at that point, also seriously damaged the ozone layer as well. So there are natural forces that are doing this. And yes, it can get extremely nasty, and it can be an extinction level event for humans. Maybe that's the thing that might draw out that generation, is trying to survive against something that might be that catastrophic, right? But we have petroglyphic records where humans went to the trouble of inventing paint, inventing painting, inventing charcoal and doing the drawing for the painting and all of this other stuff, and even chiseling into rocks in order to leave us impressions that they went through. And these humans talked about a period of time when there was no ozone layer, such that you could stick a dry stick outside of your cave in the middle of the day and the sun would get it to ignite like that. So it was just that level of intense sun reaction. And these pictographs are within a narrow band in the tropics all around the planet. The tropics is the area that the moon wanders around, but it's also that part of the planet that has the most intense area of concentration of solar rays. And so in that period of, so on these islands in the Pacific, you find these petroglyph drawings of people hiding in caves and putting a stick out to get fire. You find those same drawings in the Caucasus Mountains in the far southern regions of the central part of the Eurasian continent. You find them all around the planet. You don't find them in places like the far north or south. So there are no such drawings like that in Australia, for instance, nor are there any in the Indian territories, you know, the First Nations territories in Canada. And so we can make some certain conclusions that at the time that those things were done, which we estimate was about 60 to 80,000 years ago, there was a period of time where the ozone didn't exist to the point where it was helping us much. And a lot of human activity was outside of the caves, was conducted at night. And thus maybe that's why we were cavemen, was because that generation had to resort to that just to survive. And that it cured itself, it changed, it went away. And we have these 425-year cycles that produce the mini ice ages. The mini ice ages last about 125 years. Then we go for another 425 years and so on. Those are all part of other cycles. And the whole thing is such that we live on a self-healing, self-renewing environment. At the moment, it's not particularly favorable to us, but I'm not of the opinion that we're causing the ozone hole. Now, it is true, I think, that our activities with rockets, space stations, and this kind of stuff have the potential to produce so much pollution that they could aggravate the ozone holes themselves. But I don't think that 100% stopping that activity would stop the degradation of the ozone hole, of the ozone layer, rather.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I know that there's some reports that I'm sure you read the Rhode Island Geoengineering Act of 2017, where they talked about certain blanketing applications around the planet, literally attempting to, block the sun as depleting certain parts of the ozone. But it doesn't mean, like you said, it's the only culprit. There's a whole bunch of things that 2003 volcano is absolutely fascinating. I remember you brought that up one time before, and it makes you think if there's other volcanoes to that extent, then what could happen? And the caveman thing, wow, that's a very powerful thought there, Clif. I had never put that into consideration before. Now, what do you see?
Well, wait a second. Let's also take another little dip into history here, right? If you look at history, we find all these things that are really strange and could not be explained until we look at it from a perspective of climate change over time. So, for instance, the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, used to be so purple that it could be described as wine colored. And it was done so for hundreds of years in literature that arose all around the Mediterranean. It was wine colored. And then somewhere along the period of, say, maybe the 2300 BC or so, we started seeing some subtle levels of change, such that by the time we get into the current era here, year maybe 100, maybe 300, you no longer see references to the wine-colored sea anymore. And in fact, all you see there are references to a very turbulent, blue, malevolent, green, nasty ocean that didn't seem to exist the way that it did in the past, because the wine-colored sea was not particularly ferocious. There weren't a lot of storms and so on. And so was that a time when the ozone layer was so thick that it distorted colors? And we have the same color issue that occurs relative to literature all the time. And if you look at it, when you have whole generations that refer to a particular kind of a plant at a particular color, we could say, okay, it's epigenetics, and that's why the plant changed, and that's why we don't have that particular plant with that particular color. Or it could have been that at that time, that actually was the color because of the light coming through the ozone thickness and all of these other issues that were contributing to their particular view in that time. So we may be describing an ocean now, if you're going out, the blue sea, sailing on the blue sea, all of this kind of stuff. And 300 years from now, maybe all the oceans are purple again. And everybody thinks we're crazy to describe the ocean as blue. What were all those people thinking?
Same as the sun. I remember when the sun used to be yellow or orange.
Yeah.
Now it's bright white. But there are times, though, on the horizon when it goes down that it still has that beautiful orange color that I've noticed. But during the day, it's certainly white and bright. Another question, too, that this is from Heidi Vandenberg, Channel 27. She's got a really cool YouTube channel. She does really good Vedic astrology analysis on the star alignments and stuff like that. It's fascinating what the influence stars have over people's personal behaviors and just the way the world turns. I wonder if that has to do with maybe the electric universe kind of theory, where maybe when something's created, that energy just kind of has an imprint in the holographic image or whatever.
No, it doesn't really work quite that way, but you're correct. It is related to the energy that creates all of universe around us, which happens 22 trillion times a second. And then 22 trillion times a second, the universe is destroyed. This is what gives us the perception of motion, because our brains don't work at 22 trillion times a second. Our brains work at 60 frames a second maximally. usually 24 to 60 frames a second. So I can create myself and destroy myself 22 trillion times a second and never ever run into the issue of being destroyed just when I want to push my hands together and feel something solid. So universe is thought by us to be solid, but it's not. It's all energy. And it's energy that creates itself and destroys itself so rapidly that our poor brains are tricked into seeing it as solid. But this allows us to have motion. So if you think of energy that way, if you think of the universe as being created and destroyed continuously, the continual creation destruction model of universe, which is what the Hindus and the Chinese and the Buddhists believe. That's their viewpoint, and I have reason to also accept that that's true. If you think about that, then the influences of the stars must exist, okay? Simply because they are being recreated and destroyed exactly in sync with all of the rest of universe, including ourselves. They are energetic expressions that are larger than ourselves. Their energy is going to intrude on how we manifest each and every time we're created in these 22 trillion times a second continual creation destruction. Their influence may be subtle, but also would be undeniable if you looked at it from that particular paradigm.
Wow, that's incredible. Absolutely. And another thing too.
Anyway, what was Heidi's question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Thank you. A little bit off topic, but at the same time, it was right on cue because that explains things. And Heidi actually just said, wow, thank you for describing it that way, because she's listening in the live chat. And we've got a huge crowd right now. We've got over 1,300 people watching. It just keeps going up and up. The North Korea, the Korean Peninsula, there's a lot of hardware. There's a lot of logistics. There's a lot of troops. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of brainwashing to go into war there. I've heard stories about how there's $1 trillion worth of rare elements and minerals out there. What's going on? Are we going into Korea this year or what?
My data sets would tend to suggest that it's a Chinese problem. Okay, that China is like as I noted, all of China's land borders are filled with hostile enemies. All right, at the moment, China's very strong. No one really wants to invade it, and at the moment, it's quite happy with its relationship with the Russians, with whom it shares its longest continuous border. But it shares a border with North Korea as well, and there's something that China doesn't want to have happen. China desperately does not want to deal with millions, hundreds of millions, potentially over 100 million refugees flooding across the North Korean border and seeking solace, food, and resources out of China. Because China doesn't want to surrender those resources to North Korea. North Korea is a pain in the ass to China all the time. And now it's potentially, it's an annoyance to China all the time. A thorn always there causing issues. And it erupts at times, causes big problems and so on. This time, the eruption doesn't look like it's going to be bought off by money. And we, the U.S., we're not in a position now to buy them off again. Usually that's what they want, is they'll keep quiet for another 20 years if we give them enough money. You have to understand, the guy who runs North Korea, he's not a North Korean. He's grown up in Switzerland. He spent all of his life in Europe, Right. This guy, he wants Lamborghinis, he wants, models and, movie stars, all this kind of crud. And you just don't get that in North Korea, so he's a little frustrated. And so he just wants some more money to go out and party. But it's not going to happen this time. And the way it's all playing out, in my opinion, okay, not within the data sets, but within my opinion, it seems predictable that China will intervene at the last minute. I say the last minute because there's no point to them doing anything ahead of that particular nexus. I say that because the Chinese are Taoist. They look at time in an entirely different way than the rest of us do, right? Chinese are I think it was Sun Tzu. Anyway, the Art of War and all of these books are all about precise moment of timing, get everything set up, and wait. Don't expend your resources if you don't have to, right? You let everything get to the boil before you yank the pot off of the heat. There's no point to doing it ahead of that. And that's where China is going to be. But they're moving people now. Large amounts of their military are moving to the North Korean area because they're very much afraid that there's going to be tens of millions of North Koreans pouring across their border. And they don't want that. They've got enough problems with these 150,000 riots that are going on just within their own population at the moment. Remember, China is in the situation where most of their area, that is surrounded by the Chinese border as we understand it. Most of that area is occupied territory. It's occupied because the central Chinese area around Beijing, it has this particular racial group called the Han Chinese. And they're the rulers of the larger China. In order for them to maintain the peace, anytime they come on in and take over an area, they move in 20 Han Chinese by diktat, by direction from the government. They move in the Han Chinese until they represent 20% of that population, because they know that they can keep things under control if 20% of the population is Han Chinese. So they don't want tens of millions of North Koreans pouring across that particular border and disrupting that whole northeastern area of theirs relative to the population densities and how the flow goes, because that's nothing but hundreds of years of problems for them trying to deal with these refugees. And these people think in the long term. So Trump has an issue, right? And his issue is with North Korea and Kim Jong-un saying, I'm going to nuke Seattle and all of this kind of shit, right? And so he's got a problem of the moment. But the Chinese see whatever he does as causing them a problem for hundreds of years potentially. So they have a much higher vested interest in letting it get to a certain point and then cutting it all off and stopping anything from going much further. It does not show in our data that we get nuclear annihilation, war there with the United States as that level of major participant. Now, my problem in saying that is that the data can be unreliable in that because it's so consciously discussed. And because that's the case, there's so much discussion and mainstream media stuff about war with North Korea that my data sets are not reliable at that level. But even back a few months before the media onslaught, the data sets were forecasting problems in North Korea with a focus on China and what China was going to do, the millions of troops that were going to move in, they're going to basically, the data set is describing China doing regime change by force in North Korea over the course of 20 years. And to them, that's a better solution than obliteration and 100 years of dealing with refugee issues. And that's just the way that the data laid it out. And my suppositions about why and when they are doing it would support that. But we'll see. You know, whatever's going to go down here on this stuff, it'll probably happen, I want to say before tax day. Okay, there's just a lot of stuff showing up here before April 15th. In the United States, we're going to undergo such a level of event eruption, so much stuff coming out. The spew is going to get just so huge that by the time we get into April 15th, middle of April, we're going to have dozens of different things to talk about as current ongoing topics. Probably one of them will be what China is doing in North Korea that day.
Oh, wow. That'd be very interesting to see. Absolutely. And it does make sense. And one more question before I close out tonight. And folks, go to halfpasthuman.com. Make sure to pick up your Alta report today. I'm looking at the forecast for January this year through 2022. It's titled Soaring 20s. It's definitely worth picking up. You need a copy of this, folks. Bare Naked Wealth, number 9. And also, it's 36 pages. And like I said, I got to page 8 and I've got 8 podcasts to talk about. So it's good.
It's dense stuff. Yeah,
it is. So the last question before we close out tonight, and it's been just a real honor to have you on, Clif. Everybody's just super happy. We've got over 1,400 people now. And every time I look, there's more people watching in the live chat, and they're staying. You know, it's not like they jump on for 5 minutes. They've been staying, and it's just been growing as people have been hitting the channel. So you've also got a YouTube channel, folks. Clif's got a YouTube channel. If you didn't already know it, make sure to subscribe to his YouTube channel because he does podcasts that are out of this world. And the hyperinflation bubble, you talk about that in this report. So can you give us some dates and some things to look for with this hyperinflation bubble? And are you referring to the cryptocurrencies, or are you referring to the petrodollar?
Well, it's the death of the petrodollar that causes the hyperinflation. Okay. And we're in it now. They've been inflating the dollar for years. Now they have to do it at a hyper level just to maintain the same level of response. So it's just like heroin. You need a bigger dose each and every time. Now we're at the point where they're not going to be able to deny that they're doing mega doses because of the bond issues that are going to erupt here in the US over these next 3 or 4 months. Again, a lot of this will happen before April. and the hyperinflation will flow into cryptocurrencies. So the hyperinflation is being created in the US dollar, and the cryptocurrency world will benefit, so to speak, in that their value will be perceived higher in US dollar terms. And so in a hyperinflationary environment, you want to put your wealth, your extra calories that you're storing for your future, in something that will appreciate, that you know is appreciating for real, so to speak, right? So 2018 is the year we get real. It's like, let's get real. We got to keep it real. Real shit's going down. And if you're not real, you're going to go curl up in a fetal position and just get the hell out of the way. And what's happening is the hyperinflation is going to hit the dollar such that we'll start seeing it in our daily lives, at the gas pumps, at grocery stores, et cetera, as we go forward. It's going to put incredible pressure on the social order, and something I've been working at for years to try and get people to pay attention to, such that they could protect themselves from the problems that will become existent as we get further and further and further into the hyperinflation over these next few years. But this is a multi-year process. And that's why this year, Bitcoin 100,000. Next year, Bitcoin 350,000. Year after that, 1.5 million. And it has less to do with the perceived value of Bitcoin than the hyperinflation of the dollar, which is the sort of the last man standing in the fiat currency world. China's going to move off into digital currency. Russia's going to move off into digital currency. But the central banks of the US, because they're supporting the evil pedophilic, blood-drinking vampire Kabbalists there, that dollar system.
Just real quick too on that note, because there's like 100 people in the chat that said, is this the year that all the pedophiles are going to go down?
I don't know that all of them will go down, but this is the year it's certainly going to come out, slap you in the face walking down the street. It'll take us a long time to dismantle this insidious network. It's been going on for at least 35 years as an organized crime. From within the United States. I mean, like a seriously organized crime. So it might take us, we might still be having trials 3 and 4 and 5 years out. But yes, 2019 or 2018, you could say, that's why I say it's the year we get real. You're not going to be able to lie about what you were doing to that child. We're going to find that out, and there's going to be consequences. So we've been in a weird state. At a social order, we have been denying reality. We've been trying to live in this world that was structured by these people that we call Democrats, and the social justice warrior movement. All of these people have been trying to engineer a reality. And we've been denying reality and attempting to live in this construct. Well, you can deny reality as long as you want, but you cannot deny the consequences of denying reality. And this is the year of consequences. 2018, those consequences begin, and it will take us, as I say, maybe dozens of years. We might still be doing Truth and Reconciliation 15 years out, winding down. But we'll see trials this year. We'll certainly see a lot of deaths, as a lot of these high-end people will be basically find themselves in a choice of live through it or check out now, because they're going to have to go one way or the other. And so a lot of them will choose just to check out now. And so we'll see weird kind of death patterns, as I was alluding to earlier, not just within the general population, but especially within the elites. And then there's a lot of the elites and their minions that will simply be taken out, because people will try and protect themselves by thinking, oh, look, there's only 160 people that know I'm a pedophile. So all I got to do is kill those 160 people and I'm good. That's their thinking. And it's actually going to occur, that they will attempt to do these things. And that, of course, will make, by the time they get to that 100th person, those other 60 people are going to be just singing their heads off about what they know, because they can see the pattern developing.
It makes me think of the age of Aquarius, in the sense that things are just coming to light, and, you can't hide anymore. And that kind of stuff is just, it's fascinating to talk with you, Clif. I am so glad you came on the show, and you bring so much information. I wish that I could just talk to you for 24 hours straight. We'll do a marathon one of these days, 24 hours, and we'll find a way to keep Clif on. But he's doing so many other things. It's going to be difficult, but we'll try.
Yeah.
Any other gems you want to share with us before we close out tonight, Clif? And once again, ladies and gentlemen, halfpasthuman.com. Pick up your Alta report today.
Sure. Something that's going to be unexpected to a lot of people. especially here in USA and the USA population. And they won't know it, but your astrology people will know it. Aquarius is a male. The representation of the age of Aquarian is a male knowledge bringer, not a female carrying water. Okay, so we're now witnessing, and we have been for at least, let's say, the last year, but maybe the last 16 or 17 months, we've seen the influences of these stars, of these planets, changing our reality as we constantly pop into existence here, such that now feminism is dying. Feminism is going to morph. It's going to change, because at this moment it has become necessary in our social order that we get alpha males to become resurgent again. All right, and I know I have reasons to suspect why that is going to occur, but we don't have the time to go into it. But it'll be rather interesting for people your age and younger to pay attention to what's going on around them, in the language around them, and the new roles that men are going to start reasserting themselves into again. And, as a male, I think this is really cool. And it's going to give us a chance to restructure what it means to be male and masculine within our social order without necessarily having the prejudice heaped on us because of being male. So in other words, if we structure our social order right, then we get young men involved in martial arts, because it gives them a long viewpoint, grounds them in the social order, burns up their hormones so they're not particularly a problem to the social order while they're doing it, and it grounds them in a discipline that they can use as a guiding focus for their entire lives, right? And so a lot of our social order has been taken away from us, and I think you'll see a huge resurgence in basically all things masculine, and I mean more alpha male masculine in that sense, right? So you're going to see hunting and fishing and all of these kind of issues come back. You're going to see a resurgence into, men doing male things that are necessary to form themselves as fully adult human males within our new technological social order. And we're going to be needed in a serious way. 97% of all industrial deaths are male. The vast majority of those are white males, simply because of the population density in our particular area. 90 some odd percent of all the maimings are male. We take it, right? Men die at a younger age. We work ourselves to death trying to perform for our families and so on. And the way the data shows up, that 2018 is the year that we start this new emergence of a new kind of humanity. So humanism or feminism is going to go away, but it's not going to convert over into masculinism. We're going to go to a more even middle of the ground humanism. And it's going to be really cool. I think it'll be quite fascinating to watch you guys shape the social order over these next few years.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Let me just tell you, being an alpha male myself, I take plenty of colostrum from getthetea.com and vitamin C. No, I mean, that's actually good, because I'm tired of watching these commercials where, for example, I saw this commercial the other day where there's this, I'm not even into sports. I'll watch mixed martial arts and once in a while, but there's this guy hanging out with his friends. They wanted to watch football. So they go into the living room, and his wife and her friends are there, and, so they take over the living room. So this guy and his friends have to go out and watch the football game in like this clubhouse that was made for his wife and friends. So they go in there and they're having like this cute little pillow fight. It was quite just, like, oh, you're just, and I'm like, come on, man. And I mean, every time you see a commercial now, it's like this guy that has no testosterone anymore. He reminds me of I'm not even gonna get into it, but yes, I'll try and stay politically correct here, but yes, thank goodness. It'd be nice to see some like real people again and stuff like that. That's good to hear. And I'll tell you, man, it's been